You build a fortress around your heart, brick by brick, with the love you never received. You think it will protect you. But what happens when the very people who should have been your sanctuary become the siege engines trying to break down your walls? My name is Alina, and for 28 years, I believed my worth was measured by their approval, until the day I decided to measure it by my own silence. This is not a story of revenge. This is a story of reclamation. If you know what it feels like to be invisible in your own family, to have your dreams used as stepping stones for others, then stay. Because what comes next is freedom. Don't forget to subscribe to Elite Secrets, and let us know in the comments if this story resonates with you. Like, share, and let's begin. The final bell on my laptop chimed, a soft digital gong that echoed not just through my tiny rented room but through 6 years of my life. 6 years of meticulously packed lunches that always felt a little too small, of politely declining weekend trips with friends whose Instagram stories I'd later scroll through with a hollow ache, of wearing shoes until the soles were smooth as river stones. My eyes, dry and tired from a late night finalizing a client proposal, stayed glued to the screen. The numbers glowed with a serene finality. The last transfer had cleared. The figure in my savings account was no longer just a number, it was a key. It was the exact amount needed for the down payment on the sun-drenched studio apartment I'd secretly visited 3 times, each time standing in the empty space and imagining a life where the air didn't feel heavy with other people's expectations. I had done it, completely, utterly, and unforgivably alone. The first thing I did wasn't to call anyone. There was no one to call who would understand the seismic shift this represented. Instead, I closed my laptop, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of tap water. I drank it slowly, standing by the window, looking out at the neighboring building's brick wall. This was the view I was leaving behind. This was the life I was leaving behind. A profound quiet settled over me, a silence so different from the lonely silence I was accustomed to. This was a peaceful silence. A powerful one. I named the apartment the Silent Fortress long before I even signed the papers. The name came to me in the dead of night, a week before the move. It wasn't meant to be cold or isolating. To me, a fortress was a place of safety, of strength. Its walls, I imagined painted a soft, warm cream, would hold no echoes of arguments I was forced to mediate. Its floors, warm bamboo, would never be stomped on in anger by my father after a bad day at work. The silence there would be a choice, not a consequence of neglect. The buying process was a solitary pilgrimage. I dealt with the real estate agent, the banker, the lawyer, my voice growing steadier with each meeting. Every signature I scrawled on the endless pages felt like another brick being laid in my foundation. My family was oblivious. To them, I was still the reliable, quiet Alina, the one who sent money home every month, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who never caused a fuss. My sister, Zara, was the star, her life a constant drama of new cars, extravagant holidays, and marital spats that required family intervention. My role was to be the audience, the supportive backdrop. The day I got the keys, I went straight to the empty apartment. It was late afternoon, and the sun poured through the large west-facing window, painting a long, golden rectangle on the bare floor. I sat in the center of that rectangle, cross-legged, and cried. But they weren't tears of sadness or even overwhelming joy. They were tears of release. The weight of 6 years of sacrifice lifted off my shoulders, evaporating in the warm light. For the first month, I lived in a state of quiet bliss that felt almost illicit. I bought a single mattress and placed it directly on the floor. I had a small table, 1 chair, and a kettle. That was it. I didn't need more. I would come home from work, kick off my shoes, and just breathe. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. I'd sit with my back against the wall, watching the sky change colors behind the skyline of the old city, and feel a sense of belonging so deep it was almost spiritual. This space was my masterpiece, my unaccredited PhD in survival. Then, I made the mistake of hope. I decided to have a housewarming. Not a big party, nothing like Zara's lavish gatherings. I invited 5 people. Just 5. My mother, my father, my older sister Zara, her husband Tarek, and my childhood friend, Mina, who had moved back to the city recently. The invitations were digital, simple but elegant. I spent days planning the menu, not based on what was easy, but on what they loved. I made my mother's favorite lamb curry, slow-cooked for hours with whole spices until the meat fell apart. I prepared my father's preferred saffron rice, each grain separate and fragrant. For Zara, I attempted her adored dark chocolate truffles, dusting them with cocoa powder with painstaking care. For Tarek, a platter of spicy kebabs. For Mina, a fresh mango salad she always raved about. I cleaned the apartment until it sparkled. I bought new candles, their scent a clean, citrusy fragrance. I arranged the food on the new plates I'd bought, my hands trembling slightly with nervous anticipation. This was it. This was my moment to show them. Not just the apartment, but me. The person I had become. The capable, independent woman who had built something for herself. The table was set for 6. I looked at it, a perfect, beautiful still life of my longing. 7 p.m., the designated time, came and went. The silence in the apartment felt different now, charged with anticipation. 7:15 p.m. I checked my phone. No messages. No calls. 7:30 p.m. The rich, red gravy of the lamb curry began to form a thin, congealed skin. The ice cubes in the glasses of water I had set out melted away, diluting the lemon slices within. The candles burned lower. 8 p.m. The golden light of the sunset had faded into a deep blue twilight. My stomach was a tight knot of disappointment. Then, my phone buzzed on the counter. A surge of relief washed over me. It was a notification, but not a text. It was from a social media app. Zara had posted a video. My thumb, almost of its own volition, tapped the screen. The video loaded, showing a scene of chaotic joy. My family, my mother, my father, Zara, Tarek, even a few aunts and uncles, were gathered in Zara's lavishly decorated living room. They were laughing. My father had his arm around Zara, and in the center of the table was a large, elaborately decorated cake. The camera panned to my father, his face flushed with happiness, as he blew out the candles. Everyone cheered. My mother waved at the camera, her smile wide and genuine. They were all there. At Zara's house. Just 20 minutes away from my silent apartment. The caption beneath the video pierced through me like a shard of glass. Family is everything. Surprise party for Dad's big promotion. So blessed to have this crew. #family first #blessed. I stood in the center of my silent fortress, the aroma of the uneaten, congealing food now sickly sweet in the air. I looked at the empty chairs, the perfectly set table that now seemed like a monument to my own foolishness. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. A strange, cold clarity washed over me, numbing the sharp edge of the pain. The betrayal wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation of a truth I had been refusing to acknowledge for years. I was not part of their everything. I was an afterthought, a footnote in the story of their lives. The reliable one. The quiet one. The one who didn't need celebrating. With a hand that was surprisingly steady, I picked up my phone. I opened the family group chat, a place that was usually filled with pictures of Zara's children or discussions about their plans. I typed a single message. I hope the party was wonderful. Then, I attached the photograph I had taken an hour earlier of my beautifully set, utterly empty table. I hit send. And before any response could come, before any excuse could be fabricated, I tapped the option at the bottom of the screen. Leave group. The action felt more significant than signing the mortgage papers. It was the first active brick I was placing in my own defense. The fortress walls, I felt, grew a little thicker, a little higher. The next morning, I woke up not to a crushing sadness, but to a steely, unfamiliar resolve. The sun streamed through the window, landing on my face. The apartment was still silent, but the silence was no longer empty. It was full of potential. I made coffee in my French press, the ritual simple and meditative. Then, I sat down at my small table, opened my banking app on my phone, and navigated to the scheduled transfers. There they were. 2 automatic monthly transfers I had set up years ago. One to my mother's account, a sum I called household help. Another to my father's account, for incidentals. These transfers had started small when I got my first job, a gesture of gratitude, of duty. Over the years, they had increased, becoming a silent, draining obligation. I looked at the amounts. For the first time, I calculated what that money could have become over 6 years. It was a staggering figure. It was more than just money. It was my time, my energy, my quiet sacrifices, flowing out of me to fuel a life I was not truly a part of. Without a moment's hesitation, I selected both transfers and canceled them. A confirmation message popped up. Scheduled transfers canceled successfully. A physical weight I hadn't even known I was carrying seemed to lift from my shoulders. I felt lighter, taller. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted better than any coffee I could remember. About an hour later, my phone rang. The screen flashed Amy. I let it ring 3 times, watching the name vibrate on the wooden table. Then, I picked it up. Alina, Beta. My mother's voice was tight, laced with a false concern that I had learned to decipher over the years. The bank just called about the transfer. There must be some mistake. It didn't come through this month. There's no mistake, Amy, I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of the usual anxiety I felt during these calls. I've canceled them. The silence on the other end was profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, recalculating, reassessing the situation. Canceled? But, why? Alina, after everything we've done for you? This is your gratitude? Zara would never be so selfish. I almost smiled. There it was. The comparison. The weapon she always reached for. Zara, I said softly, the calmness in my own voice surprising me, has never had to be. I didn't wait for a response. I have to go, Amy. I have a lot to do today. I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the table, screen down. The fortress walls, I thought, feeling a strange sense of pride, were not just for keeping things out. They were for defining what stayed in. And today, I had decided to keep my peace, my money, and my self-respect firmly inside. The rest of the day passed with a strange, new rhythm. I went to the market and bought a large, terracotta pot and a jasmine plant. I spent the afternoon repotting it on my balcony, my hands digging into the rich, dark soil. It felt grounding, real. This was mine. This life, this soil, this silence. I was learning to be its guardian. The cancelled transfers were a declaration of independence that sent shockwaves through the fragile ecosystem of my family. The initial silence from their end was replaced by a low-frequency hum of passive aggression. My phone became a receptacle for their discontent. Aunts I hadn't heard from in years sent forwarded messages about a daughter's duty and the importance of family ties. My father sent a single, terse text, "Your mother is not well. The stress is affecting her health." It was a classic gambit, one that would have filled me with guilt and sent me running to their doorstep with apologies and my checkbook just a few months ago. Now, I read it, felt a twinge of the old programming, but then looked around my apartment. The jasmine plant on the balcony had sprouted a new leaf. The evening sun hit the bamboo floor in a way that created a pattern of light and shadow I found beautiful. I typed a reply, "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope she feels better soon. Perhaps she should see Dr. Ahmed." I didn't offer to pay for it. I didn't offer to visit. The shift was subtle but monumental. I was engaging on my terms. The fortress walls were holding. Days turned into weeks. The silence from my family became a constant, but I was no longer afraid of it. I filled it with the sounds of my own choosing. I signed up for a pottery class at a community center downtown. The feel of the cool, wet clay spinning under my hands was therapeutic. I made lopsided bowls and wobbly vases, and I didn't care that they were imperfect. They were mine. I started running along the riverfront in the early mornings, the cool air filling my lungs, my feet pounding a rhythm on the pavement that felt like a mantra: my life, my choice, my peace. One evening, as I was carefully painting my balcony railing a cheerful sky blue, my doorbell rang. The sound was so infrequent it still startled me. I wiped my hands on a rag and peered through the peephole. My heart gave a complicated lurch. It was my father. He stood there, looking older and more diminished than I remembered, a plastic bag from the local market dangling from his hand. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it. "Alina," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped aside. Of course, Abu. He walked in slowly, his eyes doing a slow, deliberate scan of the apartment. They took in the built-in bookshelf I had painstakingly assembled from reclaimed wood, the thriving plants on the windowsill, the few pieces of art I had bought from a local street fair. He didn't comment on the bright blue railing. He finally stopped in the center of the living area, turning to face me. The plastic bag rustled as he held it out. "I brought you some oranges. Your favorite." "Thank you," I said, taking the bag. The gesture felt heavy with unspoken meaning. He cleared his throat. "It's nice. You've made it nice." "Thank you," I said again, waiting. I knew this wasn't a social call about citrus fruit. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, uncomfortable. "Your mother, she's very upset, Alina. This apartment, it's a big step. A big responsibility. We've been talking, we were thinking, maybe it would be better, for security you understand, if we added our names to the deed. Just a formality. Family assets should be shared. It protects everyone." I looked at him, this man who had never once asked me about my job, about my dreams, about the 6 years of sacrifice it took to stand in this room. He was looking at my sanctuary, my peace, and seeing an asset, a thing to be claimed. The cold clarity I had felt the night of the party returned. "This isn't a family asset, Abu," I said, my voice even and firm. It didn't shake. "This is my home. My sanctuary. You don't get to claim a share in a piece you never helped me build." His face fell. The mask of paternal concern slipped, revealing a flash of frustration underneath. "Is that what you think? That we never helped you? We raised you. We educated you." "You did," I agreed. "And I am grateful for that. But this," I gestured around the room, "this I built on my own. With my own hands, my own time, my own money. The money I am no longer sending to you." The words hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. He stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. The daughter who was no longer pliable. The quiet one who had found her voice. He didn't argue further. He just nodded slowly, turned, and let himself out. The bag of oranges sat by the door, a bittersweet offering that felt more like a tribute than a gift. I left them there for a day before eventually taking them to the kitchen. I didn't eat them. I used them to make a marmalade that was surprisingly bitter. I gave the jars to my neighbors. The attempts to breach the fortress, however, were not over. A week later, Zara called. Her voice was sweet as synthetic syrup, a tone she reserved for when she wanted something. "Alina, hi. How's the new place? Listen, I was wondering. Tarek and I are looking at a new car. The financing is a bit tricky, and since your financial situation is so stable now, we were hoping you could co-sign the loan? It would be such a huge help. Just a signature, really." I felt a familiar pull, the old urge to please, to be seen as helpful, as good. But the image of her video, of them all laughing while my food grew cold, flashed in my mind. "I'm sorry, Zara," I said, my voice polite but firm. "I don't co-sign loans. It's a personal policy." The sweetness evaporated from her voice. "Seriously? It's just a formality. Why are you being so difficult? It's like you've become a different person since you moved into that apartment." "Maybe I have," I said quietly. "I have to go." I hung up. My mother escalated to long, rambling text messages, paragraphs filled with guilt, manipulation, and accusations of ingratitude. I stopped reading them after the first line. Their words no longer had the power to colonize my mind. I was building an immunity. The most serious test came a month later. It arrived not as a text or a call, but as a formal letter, delivered by registered post. The return address was from a law firm, Amir and Associates. My cousin, Amir, was a lawyer. My hands trembled slightly as I tore open the envelope. The letter was typed on crisp, expensive paper. It was dense with legal jargon, but the crux of it was clear and brutal. It claimed that since family funds had indirectly contributed to my education and upbringing, there was an implied familial understanding that I would provide support in return. It suggested that I should voluntarily grant my parents a right to reside in the property or, alternatively, provide a lump sum payment equivalent to a percentage of its value to avoid unnecessary legal contention. I sank onto my chair, the paper feeling heavy and toxic in my hands. This was no longer about emotional blackmail, this was a legal threat. A cold fear trickled down my spine. They weren't just trying to guilt-trip me, they were trying to take what was mine. For a few hours, I was paralyzed. The fortress walls felt paper-thin. What if they could actually do it? What if I lost this? The thought was suffocating. But then, the anger came. A clean, hot, clarifying anger. How dare they? How dare they try to steal the one thing I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears? I would not let them. I would fight. I spent the evening researching lawyers online. I needed someone sharp, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by family drama. I found Ms. Saqib. Her website was no nonsense, her bio impressive. The next day, I sat in her modern, minimalist office, telling her my story. I showed her the letter. She listened intently, her expression neutral. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Ms. Alina," she said, her voice calm and assured. "This is a baseless intimidation tactic. There is no legal grounds for their claim. Your parents' investment in your upbringing does not constitute a financial stake in your independently acquired property. We will shut this down." Her confidence was contagious. I hired her on the spot. Her response to Amir's letter was a masterpiece of legal brevity. It was a single page, a cease and desist letter stating that any further communication regarding the property or attempts to harass me would result in an immediate lawsuit for emotional distress, defamation, and malicious litigation. It was cold, hard, and final. A week later, a brief, formal letter arrived from Amir's firm, stating that the matter was considered closed. The siege, for the moment, had been lifted. The relief was overwhelming. I had faced their biggest weapon and I had won. The fortress had held. In the quiet that followed, I realized something fundamental had changed. I wasn't just safe within my walls, I was unassailable. My peace was no longer contingent on their approval or their absence. It was a fact of my existence, as solid as the floor beneath my feet. The legal victory was a watershed moment. It didn't just end the external threats, it quieted the internal ones, the lingering voices of doubt and obligation that had whispered in the back of my mind for years. The silence from my family was now permanent, and I welcomed it. It was the silence of a battle ended, not the silence of abandonment. I began to truly live inside my fortress, not just exist there. Mina became a constant and cherished presence. Our friendship, which had always been warm, deepened into something essential. We had movie nights, spreading a blanket on the floor, ordering pizza, and laughing until tears streamed down our faces. The sound of our laughter echoing off my walls was a music more beautiful than any I had known. I made new friends, real friends. There was David, a quiet graphic designer from my pottery class, who appreciated silence as much as I did. There was Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor across the hall, who would sometimes bring me a bowl of steaming soup and offer unsolicited but wise advice about her plants. My home was filled with sound, but it was a sound of my choosing. Genuine conversation, easy silences, the quiet hum of my own contentment. I invested in my space. I bought a proper bed frame. I hung curtains that billowed in the breeze. I saved up for a comfortable sofa where I could curl up and read for hours. Each addition felt like a celebration, an affirmation of a life I was consciously building for myself. The climax, the final test of my newfound strength, came unexpectedly at a relative's wedding. It was my cousin's wedding, a large, noisy affair at a fancy hotel. I debated not going, but a stubborn part of me wanted to. I wanted to show up, not for them, but for myself. To prove that I could exist in their world without being consumed by it. I went alone. I wore a simple, elegant silk sari I had bought with my own year-end bonus. I did my own hair and makeup, opting for a natural look that made me feel like myself. I avoided my family initially, mingling with distant relatives I barely knew, making polite, superficial conversation. I felt their eyes on me, sensed the whispers, but for the first time, I didn't care. I was an observer, not a participant in their drama. During the dinner, as I was hovering near the extravagant dessert table, my mother found me. She cornered me near a towering fountain of chocolate, her face a mask of strained pleasantry that didn't reach her eyes. Look at you, she said, her voice low and sharp, meant only for my ears. Living in your little palace, too good for your family now. Do you know how people talk? They say you've become cold, heartless. That success has changed you. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the lines of bitterness around her mouth, the fear in her eyes, the fear of a narrative she could no longer control, the fear of a daughter who had slipped her leash. And in that moment, I felt not anger, but a profound pity. She would never know the peace I had found. She would never understand that building walls wasn't about being cold, it was about protecting the warmth inside. They're right, Amy, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that made her flinch. It was the calmest, most powerful sentence I had ever uttered. I had to build a heart of stone to protect the softness inside. You taught me that. You taught me how to build walls so high that even your disappointment can't reach me anymore. I held her gaze for a second longer, seeing the shock register in her eyes. Then, I turned. I didn't walk away quickly or dramatically. I simply turned and walked back into the crowd. I found Mina, who was chatting with some friends, and she slipped her arm through mine, giving me a knowing squeeze. Later, we danced. I danced with Mina, with some cousins, and for a few songs, I danced by myself, my movements free and unburdened, the silk of my sari swirling around me. I was no longer the invisible sister, the reliable daughter. I was just Alina. And it was enough. The story ends not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet morning several weeks later. I am on my balcony, wrapped in a soft blanket, sipping coffee from my favorite mug. The sun is rising over the old city, painting the ancient buildings in hues of rose and gold. The city is slowly waking up, a distant hum of traffic beginning to build. Below me, thousands of strangers are chasing their own dreams, fighting their own battles. Above, clouds drift slowly, directionless but still moving forward. The silent fortress is no longer silent. It's filled with the quiet, happy evidence of my life. A half-finished book lies on the sofa. A beautiful, lopsided bowl I made in pottery class holds fruit on the kitchen counter. A postcard from Mina, who was on a trip, is stuck to my fridge. In my living room, on the bookshelf I built myself, sits a small, framed card. It was a gift from Mina. The calligraphy is simple and elegant. It reads, "You made a home out of absence." It is a reminder that peace isn't loud. It doesn't shout over the void left by others. It simply fills it, quietly, fiercely, completely, like light filling a room at dawn. I smile, sipping my coffee. They once taught me, through 1,000 small neglects and betrayals, that I wasn't enough, that my love was conditional on my usefulness. But I had learned a different lesson. I had learned to be more than they expected, more than they needed, more than they could ever forgive me for being. They lost me the moment they refused to show up for my life, and I found myself the moment I stopped waiting for an invitation to it. My name is Alina, and this is the story of how I learned that the strongest fortresses aren't made to keep life out, but to allow your own life to finally, safely, begin within. The siege was over. I had won my peace. And it was sweeter than I ever could have imagined. If Alina's journey to find her voice and build her own peace resonated with you, if you've ever had to build your own fortress, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Elite Secrets for more powerful stories about reclaiming your power, setting boundaries, and living life on your own terms. Let us know in the comments what your silent fortress is. Remember, your peace is the most valuable asset you will ever own. Protect it fiercely.